Welcome to Cross-Platform Podcast, where we discuss how to solve productivity problems across platforms. I'm Augusto Pinaud.
And I'm Gelwicks.
And today we are talking about digital ink. And Art was explaining to me what to do when your digital ink run out. It's something that...
Yeah, if your digital stylus, is having a hard time writing, just pick it up and shake it, because the electrons tend to collect in the upper end if you store it wrong. So sometimes you got to shake them down.
Getting the tip wet, I'm sure it works.
Yeah, well, that's only if your device is waterproof. Then you can just lick the tip and it'll work. But I've decided two things. One, this is going to be a fun show. But two, we need theme music. I got to find some theme music for us to roll into, because I keep bopping every time, and I'm bopping to the music in my head. No one else can hear it. So, but digital ink, this is a crazy thing, because I started doing some poking around just pre-show, wanted to prep a little bit, and I've been using digital stylus for as long as you can have a digital stylus, or at least as long as I thought you could have a digital stylus.
Right.
Going all the way back to the Palm days and the Windows CE days and back to the Apple Newton and all. It always fascinated me, being able to handwrite on a computer and have it do something with that. I found out, and here's a little trivia guessing game for you, Augusto. The first patent for a pen-based electronic capture system. You want to guess when that patent was filed?
I have no clue.
1888. And
wow.
And if you look at the next one after that, there's a big patent in 1915 about using a conductive ink to capture based on spots on a paper. Those are the predecessors to this. The first real impactful ones, you start looking at 1950 and then 1982 and 1984, when we started to see things like
those I will have. But I knew when you asked that, this was not the ones I was expecting.
It was floored me when I'm like, yeah, I guess that counts, because when we think about digital ink, we really have to think about pen computing. I mean, it's an alternative entry method. It's not just keyboard. It's not just mouse. It's another method of interacting with that digital device. And we've gotten into this mindset with applications, and especially devices nowadays, that touch interaction is so key. I mean, my 2-year-old grandson knows how to touch and swipe on devices second nature. That's his interface. So it just logically makes sense to be able to use something that we're taught in elementary school how to write and translate it over onto a digital device and be able to work with it. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Now, Augusto, I know you use an iPad and you use the Apple Pencil for this. I use Samsung devices with S Pens, but I've also used a variety of different devices over the years. But when we think about this part of it from a cross-platform perspective, I think digital ink is one of the things that doesn't do cross-platform very well.
It doesn't. Actually, when I got the Chromebook has the ability of obviously do ink. And I said, okay, this is a great idea. Let me see if I can play with these machines and then have them cross platforms. And what I found is, can you use certain applications that works everywhere? Yes. But the ink working, it doesn't synchronize. I use an application called GoodNotes. Okay. And I love it. It's an incredible app, and I can open the notes in my phone, but then it do not exist on Android. It exists on the Mac, it exists on iOS, but it doesn't exist. When I went there, do I found some of the apps that I see, and I have Nebo and others, yes, but the synchronization of those notes, that was my original idea, it's not as simple as you think. I didn't test, because I don't use that as a main thing, OneNote. That was one of the things that I didn't test. Now that as I was reviewing for this and preparing, I said, I never test OneNote in the Chromebook that I could have.
Well, I
But
know a guy who uses OneNote. So
yeah, I know a guy, but I never asked the guy if he could use it. But he don't use an iPad, so he could not give me the answer to the other side.
no, but all the way up to that, it does interact. And you've hit on probably the key challenge with this when it comes to cross-platform is that synchronization capability. Because if I just wanted to capture notes, I might as well just use a pen and paper at that point. If I can't get them to other devices, if I can't do more with it than just writing. And using tools, you mentioned Nebo, for example, and that's actually one that I'm taking my notes on right now.
Mm-hmm.
Nebo is an excellent example of an application that is cross-platform.
Yeah.
It does a very good job at handwriting capture. It does an excellent job at handwriting to text, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But again, the challenge I think that comes into all of this is digital really requires apps. It doesn't, or digital ink doesn't do browsers very well. I mean, most of the applications that we talk about, they're not running through a browser session. So you can't use something like, a Google Keep that's not running on your device because of how the digitizer has to interact and capture that digital ink layout. So it becomes an uphill fight for that. So now you have to have apps on all these different platforms to be cross-supported. OneNote's one of those applications that does that well,
Mm-hmm.
but it lacks the ability to do handwriting to text, for example, which a lot of people want to be able to do. And we'll talk a little bit about that split I think there is when it comes to digital ink between the texters and the non-texters.
And I think that is something that is important to understand, that distinction and what is the use. Because when my beginnings on digital ink were the Palm Pilot, okay, that was the first device that I was pretty decent at graffiti. At that time, I was a paralegal, and I used that Palm Pilot to take notes in court. And I love it because I could take the notes, process them in the back using graffiti in the subway, and then when I get to the office, I could just synchronize and send from the synchronization everything. The first hack I did into that device was to be able to send emails using the phone, and I bought this accessory that was ridiculously clunky and expensive, but allows me to send emails. So, and the reason that was relevant was because there was 2 computers for 13 paralegals at that time. So unless you were the first one or the second one, okay, your number on the list means everybody will come, do their work, chat, smoke a cigarette. This was the time you could smoke inside of buildings. So people were smoking, drinking soda, and they were taking their sweet time to do that document while you are waiting, doing nothing. So with the Palm Pilot, I could do it, just sit on the cradle, hit the button, and send my information, and I'm out. So it was, but at that time was really ink to text, because you could not handwrite on that thing. You could self-write, but that didn't work for Note. But you could use graffiti to do that and convert it to text. When I got the tablet PC also had a pen stylus, and it could do some of it, but it was great. And that's when I discovered highlight PDFs. And because for that, it was incredible. It was bulky and heavy, but it was what it was, and everything was bulky and heavy at that time. And with the iPad, with the Apple Pencil, that's, I will say even today, my main use is more highlight than digital ink for capture, mostly because my handwriting is awful. So I need to be really careful that if I'm going to take notes, handwriting notes on the iPad, I need to have time super close to that meeting to translate what I did. Otherwise, they're lost.
Yeah, you bring up probably the most important point when we dig into this text versus non-text divide. Taking handwriting and turning it into a keyboard alternative, for lack of a better name.
Correct.
a lot of the pushback you'll get is, oh, my handwriting's terrible. My handwriting's terrible. It doesn't recognize it. And that's a very valid point. Graffiti, for those of you who aren't quite as old as Augusto and I, was kind of a hybrid method of printing on palm-based devices that allowed you to rapidly print using stylized characters that it could easily translate, rather than trying to translate things like cursive. Translation of cursive writing is the holy grail of handwriting recognition, because everybody's handwriting is different. Matter of fact, it can be different on the same page, much less between person and person and note to note and book to book. So being able to do that translation really became a driving force. And one of the things I remember when Apple Newton came out, its big thing was that it could recognize handwriting. And everybody's like, oh, this is really cool. And then all kinds of things faded off. Technology just really wasn't where it needed to be as of yet. I don't even know that today it's where it needs to be for true handwriting recognition to be generally adopted. But I don't think that's the fault of the tech. Again, I think it's the fault of we are dealing with an interface to the computer that is really an analog interface being turned into digital. And I equate handwriting recognition to voice recognition. And the struggles that you have with voice recognition around inflection and accents and regionalities and things like that, that can really hang up voice rec and voice translation. Well, it's the same thing with handwriting. It has that uphill fight. So what we find...
even when you go to voice recognition, I told people, when one of the things I used to say that you need to learn to type, okay? Because typing is the biggest obstacle that you have to enter information in a machine. Mm-hmm. Now that voice recognition is getting incredibly better, I teach people, well, you need to find which one works for you. You can install Siri if you have an iPhone. You can install Big G if you have another phone, okay? But also you can install Big G in here. And what I have discovered is, depending how your pronunciation is, this has nothing to do with language, has to do with pronunciation. The Big G or Siri will understand you better or worse. Even same thing with Madame A, okay? Madame A will recognize or not recognize you based on your pronunciation. So when we talk about our devices, figure it out what works. I have clients that I have installed the Google keyboard because now they can dictate the responses that is much faster than what they can type on the phone, especially as you come to understand which one is your main device, and that is relevant to this ink. How important is inking for you? You know?
Yeah, it's really, as voice recognition has made its leaps over the past few years, it pushes handwriting recognition, I don't want to say further down the tree, but more into a niche role, because you can do just what you were saying. You can dictate whatever you're doing. I do scripts for articles, drafts of articles. I just go into Word, turn on dictation, and just talk my way through it and then go back and edit. It's much faster. It's much easier. And the accuracy is to the point now where I'm not wasting a lot of time cleaning up the text that I'm capturing. I can do, because before...
I'm going to laugh. No, I'm going to laugh because 2006 or so, I'm writing this book and I bought this dictation software for lawyers, okay? Because it was supposedly the best thing. Put it in the Mac, put my headset, start driving, okay? And it was a 2-hour drive, okay? And I dictate my soul into that book, okay? Get to the office, pull the computer, connected, really excited. When I look at that, I say, I don't even know if I can really spend the time translating what I tried to say. I just simply select A, delete.
Yeah, it's really tough. I remember back in the days of the Dragon naturally speaking.
It was a Dragon naturally.
Yeah, that it was always because you had voice commands and prompts and things that you could interact with. And that's where that translation part on the digital ink side really comes into play, because we're trying to do something that removes a device, in this case the keyboard, and supplants it with something that is more intuitive and more natural, in this case a pen. But there's a lot of hang up points that come along with that. I use my digital, one of the challenges that I see a lot with digital linking, and if you're watching the live video, you'll see what I'm holding up. I have two different S Pen styluses. There's a difference of about an inch and a half in length between these two styluses.
And
There's
the
there's
thickness will
yeah,
be my thing.
they're about, the one stylus is probably about 3 times as thick as the other one. Those little differences can make a huge impact on the quality and the comfort of your handwriting, which then impacts the translation. So getting a good stylus, it's one of the things that Apple did very well, is they never released a little stylus. They never went half baked on the thing. It's been a chubby pencil from the beginning. It's been the size of a number 2 pencil that everybody grows up with. There's that natural comfort with using that particular device.
That I'm going to say to that, the original Apple Pencil, I bought this case. It was made of wood, and it was fantastic. And it was not because it make it thicker. It was because it gives you a place to put your fingers. The first Apple Pencil was perfectly round, and then you could not find really that great place to hold it. On the second generation, you have now a side that is flat, so you could stay on the charger. That changed because now you can put your finger to write on that flat little place, and it really changed completely the interaction between the full round Apple Pencil versus the second generation with that line.
And it's a very nuanced interaction that you have with the stylus device. And I equate that to finding a good keyboard. Everybody knows what a bad what a bad keyboard feels like. But not everybody's bad keyboard's the same. Some of them have too short of a throw. Some of them have too long of a throw. Some of them have the keys slightly off to what we're comfortable with. Once we find a keyboard we like, we go with it. Well, there's hundreds of different keyboards out there. There are very few digital stylus, which means that you've got to get one. They've got to get it right the first time to be able to use it effectively. But to circle back a little bit around the whole digital linking and the capture piece, not everybody's trying to take their handwriting and turn it into text. One of the biggest things, and if we talk about the OneNote piece, one of the biggest uses of digital ink in OneNote is on the iPad itself. And there's a lot of people that use it like virtual paper. They take advantage of the fact that you can create backgrounds. They take advantage of the fact that you can put objects on pages and move them around and use it like truly virtual paper, capturing their handwriting, zooming in, writing in detailed blocks, and then saving those pages. Not as concerned about the text interaction of the content, but more concerned with the fact that it is a clean slate for you to be creative and to use for whatever your interactions are. I think that's really interesting in my mind because it's not something from a computer person's perspective that would be a priority. If you go into online communities that look at, digital bullet journal, which is a really common use for digital ink, there are tons and tons of incredibly well-designed and actually beautiful layouts that are very complex that require you to be comfortable with how they're laid out. But none of them are, very few of them are focused on turning your handwriting into text. They want you to be able to just capture your handwriting style. So to me, it's an interesting divide because now we start to look at, who's learning how to use this? I mean, we have the early adopters and we have the creatives who are doing this. But now if we start to think about like students, for example, is digital ink something that's worthwhile for students?
Well, and let me bring two step backs on or add another person, and it's the casual artist, not the professional. Okay, yes, the professional is different, but that person who likes to draw, always liked to draw, and now they're giving back themselves permissions to. And I have a couple of friends who has got iPads
Mhm.
for that purpose, not because they were looking necessarily into more to have that digital notebook where they can paint or draw everywhere. They are not artists, they have other professions, but drawing, coloring is a
Oh, yeah.
vehicle to let stress, release stress.
Graphic design,
Oh, graphic
absolutely. I'm
design
sorry.
is massive for this. Yeah, but no, I'm talking about people who don't do it. This is not they're not sharing those
Oh,
drawings.
just
They're for
personally?
themselves, just personally. And it is incredible the amount of people who have discovered back that and going back to just drawing and have that unlimited, quote unquote, unlimited palette of colors on one Apple Pencil and
Mhm.
going back to drawing and going back to other things.
It is fascinating. I do use the drawing capability of my tablets. There's an application called Skedio that I use because it gives you the ability to basically do digital graph paper
Uh-huh.
and then tell it to snap to grid and snap to a 45 degree. So when I'm going through and I'm designing maybe something I'm going to make out in my shop, I'll sit down with Skedio and start laying it out. I don't need a CAD tool to lay that out. I don't need something complex like SketchUp or something like that. I can just sit down with my pen and start mocking things up. And that friction, virtual friction between
Mhm.
me and the idea that I'm putting down is very low
Yeah.
because I don't have to think about how the tool itself works. I know how to work a pencil. I'm pretty good at that. So that works fine. But when we start to look at things like, for example, with students, and I'm looking forward to talking to our guest next week about this because it is in the education space. When you take things like digital textbooks, PDF versions of textbooks, digital ink is a great combination tool with that. Being able to not only go through and highlight, but mark up copy and provide your own
Notes.
annotations and cross-reference between things and create your own illustrations within it without having to worry about marking up a $400 chemistry book, for example.
Well, even I tell you, I went to a e-course, to a course. It was not an e-course; it was a course, an actual full-fledged. And they sent me, was a 4-day program, and they sent me this paper, and I write the instructor and say, why? Send
Mhm.
me a PDF. I say, oh, we stopped sending the PDF because people then complained that there was too many pages to print. I say,
Well,
fine,
because you're printing them
give me
out.
the option, I don't, can you please send me a PDF? And he did. And I'm grateful because just the idea, and I saw it during the days of this program, people, well, wait, let me find this page. And I was like, oh, I can do search in here and click, go to the page back.
Mhm.
And that, those kind of things has always been super useful for me. I remember years ago,
Mhm.
my wife was going to be traveling for work, and it was heavy traveling between the U.S. and Europe and back, and they give her the manual, and the manual for this program she needed to do, it was 2,000 page. So she's looking me at these things almost in tears. Okay, like I can't carry these things,
Yeah.
in a plane, in the bag. What I'm going to do? So this is, I mean, 20 years ago. But then we basically scanned it. We went, bought a scanner and scanned the thing. So she took a PDF with her,
Mhm.
and so she took the PDF, blah blah blah. And at some point in the training in Switzerland, one of her bosses come and say, "Where is your manual?" And she just lift the phone and show her the PDF. And the guy was fuming. And so she asked her, why you are fuming? And say, why nobody give me that idea? I've been carrying this thing back and forward.
I love it when people get upset because they realize that somebody else has figured this out before they did. But yeah, I mean, this is one of the inherent benefits of something like digital ink. Uh, I'm a notebook guy, always have been. I have literally a foot locker full of blank notebooks because I just love paper and pens and fountain pens and things like that. But there's an inherent weakness that you wind up with a foot locker of them. You write something down in a notebook and then you have to go hunt it out and you have to dig it out. Being able to use digital ink,
That
you
was,
can.
by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but that's
No.
what the bullet journal came as a brilliant thing. And I told people, don't
Mhm.
forget about the bullet journal, but if you are a notebook guy, take that index. Because now you can look into indexes and say, is here? No, it's here. No, it's here. Oh, it's here. Page 36. Now you can go there
Yeah.
and save hours of your life. If you just forget about the rest of the bullet journal, just learn the indexing. And I have given that to a couple of my clients because they are big journaling people. And said, yeah, but I have. And say, yeah, from now on, build the index. Because as soon as you start building the index, you can come back to them and look at the index, what it is. And even if you say, oh, I need to reference this, this will be great to reference. Now you can write that down on that index, reference on notebook so-and-so, on page so-and-so, year so-and-so, and you can save hours of your day. I have a file cabinet on Evernote, and that's how I describe it. And I scan and dump everything in there. And the reason is, even the few things I have in paper, I have to scan and dump it in there because I can search. So from the booklets in CDs, okay, that I want to keep because maybe it was a training and they came with a good booklet, scan it and dump it in there in PDF, so I can scan and search. Oh, where is that? I read this, and I can get the answer immediately. That for me, always been priceless.
Here's a little inside baseball for you, talking about OneNote. I mentioned earlier that OneNote doesn't do handwriting to text conversion. Actually, I lied.
Recognition and
well, and here's what it does. In the background, it will take your handwriting and turn it into text, and it puts it as a meta layer inside the note itself, and then it uses that for searchability. So you're not losing the benefit of the digital ink, but you're gaining the benefit of being able to search based on OCR, and then it'll actually go back and highlight the sections in your handwriting that match the search. That's incredibly useful, and that's one of those things that I was talking to a couple of people online today about that tool, and there's more improvements coming with it, and I think some of those improvements are going to be tied to, for example, creating an image or an object inside of something like OneNote and then linking that to another page, making it a tappable link. That's massive. To me, that's the kind of thing that is the game changer, because that solves the problem of large numbers of pages that don't have interactivity. And that's the benefit of the digital aspect, is the interactivity and the searchability. So I think we'll see that continue to evolve and develop with these tools themselves. The other thing, though, with regular analog assets is not only the storage, but the accessibility. If I'm not at home, not one of those does me any good.
Right.
The ability to have that access on the go makes a huge difference. But then we go back to the whole sync issue. Because if I'm used to, for example, like right now, I'm taking, my notes on my tablet. I don't have my tablet with me all the time, but I have my phone. If I have made this part of my cross-platform productivity, or my thing, if I made it part of my thing and I want to, the brain just shut down for a second there. That's okay.
We just have a reboot. That's what happened in cross-platform when your brain uses a Windows.
What?
You sometimes froze and reboot. You get blue screen of that and come back.
If anybody could have seen that on my little forehead, you would have seen like a little loading symbol at that point, because my brain just completely shut down in that phrase. But anyway, if you've made this part of your thing and capturing by hand and handwriting is part of your process, you want to be able to do that wherever, whenever. That's always one of the reasons why the Galaxy Notes, for example, the LG Stylus, the various phone devices that supported a stylus had those capabilities to be able to provide that on the go. Now we're seeing that more and more and more. Augusto and I were talking about it prior to the show. What does it take in a mobile device to be able to provide digital ink? Well, there's really two ways to do digital ink. There's active and there's passive. I say active and passive. It's really active and capacitive. Capacitive is basically emulating a finger. You get the cheap, styluses like off a Wish or whatever that have the little squeezy bulb at the end. They provide some interactivity, but their accuracy is so low that it makes digital ink very difficult. You can jot a quick note, but that's pretty much about it. The active device or the active styli, things like the Apple Pencil or the S Pen or the USI pens that you can get for Chromebooks now, those have literally circuitry in them to provide higher levels of interactivity and accuracy. 406 or 4060 or 96 levels of interactivity and sensitivity on some of those devices. It's a totally different experience. There's a device now out called the Remarkable 2, which is basically an e-ink digital tablet that allows you to write on it. And its claim to fame is that it's just like using paper. It feels like paper, it flows like paper, it has that interactivity, but you get all the benefits of digital. Those two divisions, then, if you're going to use this all the time, you're going to want something that has that active capability, because it's going to provide you better functionality. Now, going back to what we were talking about earlier, how do you provide that in a mobile device? Well, underneath the glass screen, the touch screen, you have to have a digitizer that'll work with the stylus. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you might as well just use the capacitive one and have the equivalent of a little finger on there. So in some instances, the manufacturer, well, almost all of them, they have to redesign their phone if they want to provide that capability. We saw that on the Samsung side of the fence, because the Note for the longest time, or the Note line, was the only one that had an S Pen. When the S21s came out, they provided S Pen support because they put a digitizer under it, but they didn't come with an S Pen built in. You had to buy it separate. The new ones, like the Fold 3 that was released today or announced today, supports an S Pen because it has two digitizers under the two different screens. But it's a hardware decision that has to be made to support this technology. It's not an arbitrary thing.
Correct.
Apple doesn't have that in their mobile devices yet. I would not be surprised, though, if we see that come sometime in the future, but I don't know when.
I don't. Yeah, I'm going to say there is a brand of pens of digital ink called Adonit, Adonit, and one of the things they have tried for years is to being able to get that precision when the device do not have a digitizer, and they have really tried to make the tip so the tip is really, really small and you can really get a lot more precision into that, and they do a reasonable good job. Nothing compares to the S Pen, nothing compared to the Apple Pencil, but in compared to what is on to their competitors in that market, they do a good job. But there was something interesting that you said. I have had a lot of conversations regarding the Remarkable 2, and the first topic it came to me was, well, I like the idea that is like e-paper. And I was looking at this person and say, well, but you can do the same thing on the iPad. And they say, what do you mean? And I say, well, if you go to the settings, you can turn all the colors in the iPad off, and now you get the equivalent of the e-ink, and it will work now with a pencil that works incredibly well. My second thing is portability, and what's going to happen when that device die or you decide to stop using with that data. How you're going to extract that data. And that's where, as of right now, I will stay on Android or I will stay on the iPad. I will stay on the iPad, but is that how you're going to get what I use that is good notes? It's all PDF. Everything is a PDF. And I can go and click in there, whatever is I create and export as a PDF. It does a backup daily or every hour. I don't remember how often it is now. And what it does is got anything that was created by me and make a PDF copy in Dropbox. So I will not lose anything. But not only that, if they decide to shut down their application right now, I can open a PDF on anything. There is no limits into that. So that is something that I think is key to think when you look at these things.
It is absolutely critical. We talk about this all the time. What's your exit strategy with any application that you're using? When you talk about tools, for example, like OneNote synchronizes in the background, so it's got availability across platforms. You look at specialized tools. Squid is an excellent example on the Android side. Matter of fact, Squid's on iOS too, isn't it? It's on
I
both,
think it is,
I think.
yes.
Okay. Squid's a beautiful handwriting application. Doesn't do handwriting recognition, but it's a great note-taking tool. Absolutely beautiful for that. And it does not synchronize well. It doesn't have that functionality built into it. To me, that's a big limitation. But when we start to look at where this is going, I mean, we've circled back to this idea of requiring apps. Well, just this week, Google announced that they're going to be releasing this thing called Cursive. And Cursive is actually being released in sync with a couple of new Chromebooks that are coming out. Cursive is going to be a PWA-based handwriting application.
Mm-hmm.
That's huge.
Oh, yes.
I'm bigger than I would have initially imagined, because for people who aren't familiar with what a PWA is, it's a progressive web app. It means that you just download and run in the equivalent of a browser window. Well, now I don't have to have a dedicated app on my tablet and my phone and my desktop and wherever. All I have to have is a browser that supports PWAs and does it well. That's the one thing. And I can use that. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't change the fact that I still have to have a digitizer and a stylus to be able to do this. It won't magically make every machine handwriting friendly. But what it will do is provide a very portable capability for handwriting capture and synchronization across multiple devices. It's nice to see that they're bringing it out as a PWA, because again, that gets you out of the vertical ecosystem lock-in. You could use this theoretically on Chromebooks, on Surface tablets, on Macintoshes, anything that'll support that touchscreen capability.
Well, and you mentioned something, because this is, I got that. I was so excited, and I said, and until I read PWA, and I said, because I thought exactly that. This could be the solution for that. Bring it to the Surface, bring it to the Chromebook, bring it to the iPad. But for that, I need them to get the PWA. Sadly, will not work. That said, I think they're coming into an amazing thing. And if Google will put it as an app for the iPad, where now I can go this and I can do it on my iPad and get to my Windows and open that PWA and get to the Mac and open the PWA and open the Surface and continue writing, that will be incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be where it gets hung up, I'll be honest, because they're trying to avoid the app part of it, because they have an app that does handwriting capture. It's Google Keep. It's not fantastic at it, but it works. So this would be Google duplicating yet another one of those apps. This isn't a messaging app where they'll have 12 of them that do the same thing. So I don't know that they're necessarily going to go down that path. But when you look at the companies that can provide that cross-platform capability for this type of functionality, like I said, Microsoft's a great example of it, because they don't care. They will play on anybody's platform as long as you're willing to play ball with them. Looking for other apps and vendors who write these apps, like a Squid, for example. If Squid ever gets around to fixing their synchronization capability, they would be a perfect candidate for this cross-platform opening and leveraging. But I still think this is enough of a niche area that it's going to be a little while before we see anybody really sink their teeth into this. Like I said, on the education side, I think there's huge benefits on the education side. I think that the capabilities, especially now that we've got Chromebooks that support the USI stylus standard, for example, like the Lenovo Duet, that's a perfect gateway type of device into this.
Right.
Low enough price, 2-in-1 flip configuration, so you can flip it around, you can take your notes, you can do the PDFs. There is the opportunity for this to really start to blossom in fertile ground, because the education space is all about being able to take advantage of the tools that you have in new and creative ways. The corporate space, not so much. I don't see a huge demand in the corporate space.
But you see, it is funny because in the corporate space, they're terrified of the digital handwriting. I have the opportunity to talk and to show and do this in a couple of corporate settings, and I have always found resistance in the corporate. No, I'm fine with my notebook. I'm okay with my notebook. They are not open yet to the handwriting, the digital handwriting. I don't know necessarily why. I have my ideas, but I don't know why.
Now, there is one group within, not necessarily corporate, but within the business space, but that I found that can really benefit from digital ink. And that's the so-named frontline workers. When you're dealing with things like form completion. So think about the amount of paperwork that a lot of people have to complete out in the field. Digital ink is a great way to handle that problem. Being able to have a PDF-based form that they can just pull up on a screen, fill out, and hit send. And it's done. They don't have to worry about a keyboard. They don't have to worry about anything else. Makes that completion process much more efficient. It also means that the devices can be better ruggedized for the environments than requiring a keyboard. I mean, if I have an iPad that has like an OtterBox case on it, one of those bomb-proof cases, and an Apple Pencil, and I can stand there and just fill out whatever my completed forms are for the day, hit send. If I drop it in a puddle, I drop it in a puddle. It still keeps working. That's big for that environment. Again, we're still talking about a niche type of thing, but it does make life a lot easier. I've completed a lot of forms, especially with PDF editors, using digital ink. It's a great way to do it because they send you the form, you fill it out, you hit send, plus you keep a copy of the form.
Yeah, I do that a lot on the iPad too. Oof.
There's some interesting ways that that's being handled too.
Actually, for parents, I'm sorry, for parents, now that we're coming into the back to school, I know next week we're going to talk to Frank Buck about education, but for parents who we need to sometimes meet the form from kid A and the form from kid B and the form from kid C, and it's the same form. And you're like, why you didn't put at the beginning all the name of the kids? Doesn't change. Right. For that one, it's beautiful. You handwrite it there, duplicate, and fill now. And the kid specific and send.
It's interesting because that's one of the things that doesn't translate well for a keyboard. When you've used things like Adobe Form Filler, for example, on a keyboard and a mouse and all, you got to mouse to the right box and then you got to adjust it to the right size and type it in. Maybe it'll go in the right size. If you're using a stylus, it's no different than what you would have been doing at the dining room table.
All right.
So it does make life a lot easier in that respect. I've found also that in just recent playing, one of the things on my Samsung tablet, for example, there's an option that allows me to go to text fields on, say, a browser page. And instead of having to pull up the keyboard, I can tap in the text field, handwrite, and it'll do the handwriting to text in that text field. It's not perfect. I mean, it's a little clunky, but it means I don't have to open the keyboard. So there's a lot of those pieces that fit into this really well. I've gotten more and more into I'm deep into a paper elimination project right now, scanning the document, then going back and putting notations in color on the document for the things that are important for it. I get rid of the paper. I have searchable content, and I know why I kept that stinking piece of paper. And if I ever need to print it out again, I have it there and it's accessible. So there's a lot of pieces that can fit into this from the digital ink standpoint. But when we start to look at tools like, for example, the Chromebook pieces and the tablets now, more and more of these stylus interactions are coming into play. I go back to probably the most important part of this equation. People need to improve their handwriting. That's the linchpin on a lot of this stuff. And it's an old school thing, and you'll hear me jump up and down on my soapbox all the time about handwriting quality and handwriting practice. It's like a keyboarding skill in my book. If you can type great. You should be able to write clearly too. And I don't care if you're printing or cursive, it doesn't matter. You need that quality because there are times where you won't have a keyboard available. So it's one of those basic skills that we've seen over the years. People have said, oh, handwriting quality is getting poor because people are spending so much time typing and things like that. And there is a modicum of, or a bit of truth to that. But it's still one of those skills that can be practiced easily. And I think this makes that very possible to be able to go through and practice and erase. And when you think about writing something down, for example, like in Nebo, if I write something in Nebo and I mess up a word, all I have to do is cross it out. As soon as I cross it out, it deletes the word out.
Yeah.
Or I can hold the stylus button down and erase something. That's all the benefits of a whiteboard. But it simplifies it to the point where I've got it right here and available. So, yeah, it's a skill that people need to maintain if they're going to take advantage of this kind of technology to its fullest. If you're going to use it at just straightforward, PDFs and that sort of thing, you should be fine if you're just printing and things like that.
Yeah, I one of those who has poor handwriting, and my handwriting is really, really poor, and it's something that without a doubt can improve. The conversion, I blame it on the languages, but the conversion has getting good. Even that my poor handwriting can convert. It's a relatively good accuracy. That is incredible for me because I consider mine awful.
We're continuing to see drastic improvements in the handwriting recognition capabilities. And I think it will only get better, especially with the amount of effort that's going into the AIs on the back end for voice recognition. It's a similar type of thought process. I'm sure somebody out there in the AI space is jumping up and down going, it's nothing the same. That's okay. To me, it's very similar. It's that interpretive process of turning something analog into something digital. But I think as we go through this, we will still continue to find more and more uses for this. I encourage people to give this a try. It does, at this point, again, require an investment in hardware. You have to get the right hardware to be able to do this. But once you have that hardware, you can try and put this to use, and you can see if it works for you. It may not, flat out. It may just not be your thing. But then again, it might. So digital ink, it's a thing. It's not going away.
It's not going away. It's actually going to stay here. And actually, when I look at my kids, my daughter with her iPad and her pencil, she draws in that thing. I mean, it's really interesting how much hours she spent drawing. And
so to her, it's not a limiting tool at all. It's a blank canvas. I mean, she has access to all these different things. And there's some really neat apps for that.
And actually, yes, she is. Actually, if you think about us as kids, okay, if you wanted to draw, well, you have 12 colors, okay? Or at least that's what I remember I have. Okay. You always dream for somebody to give you that 300.
You want the 64 color box of crayons? Yeah.
That never happened. Okay, I have 12. And not only that, I grown up to be much careful with my things, but as a little kid, I was not. So I always have 6, maybe 4. Okay. So with her, she had an application, it's called Concept. And Concept allows you to access all the colors based on Pantone colors. So she can draw based on that and then translate it. And it is really, really exciting what she can do with that.
Yeah, and that's where I think the door opens with this, is that as we generationally are making this change, I think it can go a long way. I'm curious, and I'm going to explore this a little bit more, that actually I think handwriting recognition may be really useful for older generations who are more computer adverse, because it doesn't require pushing the right button on the keyboard or clicking the right button on the mouse. If you can have a form and sit there and fill it out, it works. And they know how to use a pen. So I don't know. It's an interesting approach. I think it can be a linchpin part of people's productivity platforms,
Yeah.
it can also be something that you try and never do again.
Well, and it happened. I shared the story. I think we talked about this a couple of episodes ago. My wife takes copious notes, but on paper.
Mhm.
And I got her many years ago an iPad Pro for so she could change from that, do it. And at that time, it was so many obstacles from the business, okay, perspective, like, well, how do we know you are taking notes and not checking email or whatever, that she used it for 3 days and came back and say, thank you very much for the present. I'm going back to my 11-year notebook. Please print the pages that I handwrite so I can attach it to the book and let it go.
That's something, unfortunately, that's not the tech's fault.
No. Right. I'm not blaming the tech, but he's part of the reality that you're going to find in the world.
Yeah, there will always be Luddites when it comes to this stuff. There will always be doubters. There will always be, and I think that's when we talk about cross-platform as a whole, we're talking about putting together a platform for ourselves that we can do our work effectively.
Right.
And I firmly believe that if taking things digitally by hand, writing them down, is what works for you, then do that thing.
Do that. Mm-hmm.
Figure out a way to get it to where it needs to go. I mean, because you got to process it and you got to report it. But that capture piece, if that's the efficient capture for you, then do it. And it may not be the only thing. I'm not saying that anybody should do, throw out their keyboard and throw out their microphones and things like that. No, I use all the different variants. There's certain times, certain ones work better than others. Get comfortable with them. Right. And then you find that you're reducing that friction for yourselves.
Yep.
So, all right. I think we've probably beaten the heck out of our digital pens enough for right now. So
I'm gonna still have no ink.
Yeah, so. You know what? Just store it upside down for a little bit, and the electron should run down.
Okay,
so
I will.
It'll be fine.
I will do that, since everything else I have tried have failed. But with this, follow us where you like to listen podcast, like us or subscribe to us, and leave us a review. You can also interact with us on PersonalProductivity.club. We are there, and you can ask questions and share more stuff. We share there an article. We're going to share there an article about last week. We talked about OneNote, and as soon as we finished the show, the next day, a bunch of news came about OneNote. So we're working to get in a couple of articles to talk about that. So we are Augusto Pinaud on our Gelwicks, and see you next time from their favorite device.